Welcome back to week 2. In this module, we're going to be looking at what technical communication is, what technical style is, as well as some of the foundational tips for technical communication. These will help you write better memo assignments for our class, but they'll also come in handy for most of your other academic or professional writing endeavors. Just a quick note about this lecture in particular. It uses a lot of sentence examples to explain the concepts of technical style, so be prepared to read a bunch of text on these slides, but most of the other instructor videos for our class are shorter and they don't require as much literal reading off the slides. So, what is technical communication? This might be the first time that you've heard this term. It's not a very strict term. It's just the genre of writing that is user focused and typically has some kind of objective like explaining or demonstrating. The goal of tech comm is to meet the needs of your user or your reader, and that could be by helping them perform a task or answering a question or making a decision. The writing also tends to be based more in objective facts than opinions or subjective experiences like creative writing. I say tends to here because there is a bit of a gray area. For example, the memo assignments in this class do ask you to reflect on your experiences, but through a more objective or evidence based lens. You may have heard of technical communication, or you may have heard the term technical writing. And both are ways to describe this genre of writing, but the term has broadened out from writing to communication. And that's because, as you can see here, even in these earlier days when TechCom was associated mostly with things like manuals and instructions, there are visual aspects, there are design elements, things other than word choice and language that go into producing a resource or communicating information to someone. People working in the technical communication profession have lots of different avenues and that they may end up working in as far as the types of content that they produce. Another important thing to note is that in most knowledge or information based careers, you'll be doing some level of technical communication. You may be writing to your boss, writing to your colleagues, documenting your process or your findings or the goals of a project. And these can all be forms of technical communication. And really, at its most basic level, technical communication is about ensuring that the message that you meant to convey, or the most important or poignant elements of that message, are the ones that are received by the user. Any form of communication is two ways. It's what you're putting out there, but it's also what they're able to receive as your audience. And there's many things that can impact what they receive, such as your word choice, your formatting. It could be design choices or distracting typos or taking away from the clarity and fullness of your message. So that's the more high level way of thinking about technical communication. And technical communication is there's a 99% chance that it'll be a part of the job that you take on after UNT. So technical communication style, what this module is about, is going to give you tools that not only help you improve your writing, but also how you think about writing. When you learn to structure your thoughts in a way on paper, it helps you better understand the information that you want to convey. And when you're writing more complex pieces like a project plan or research report, these tools will help both you and your audience understand the material better. As you get more practice with these tools, you'll find that writing becomes easier. And so this course has an entire unit on technical communicators and what they do as a job. If we get to that unit and you discover that you're interested in pursuing technical communication, definitely schedule some time with the advising team in the TechCom department. At UNT, we have a couple of TechCom major programs, but there are also a variety of minor programs and certificate options as well. Now we're going to get into a basic overview of what it means when we say technical style. The word style is unfortunately the term that is used in this industry to mean this topic. And the reason that I say unfortunately is because style is already a very loaded word that has a lot of different definitions. But in technical style, the word style doesn't really refer to grammar or punctuation or anything like that. Instead, it refers to tone and specifically the clarity of your writing. Are your sentences constructed in a way that it's easy to understand? Does your writing communicate what you want it to communicate? How precise is it? How specific? As a reader, am I walking away with what you as a writer intended for me to walk away with? That's what we mean when we say technical style. This isn't meant to devalue things like grammar, spelling, punctuation. Those are still critical for delivering a professional, consumable piece of writing. It's just that the focus of technical style is making sure that your writing helps people understand what you're saying, rather than getting in the way of your message. In this type of style, you want writing to be clear and concise and easy to read. And there are specific ways that you can order words within a sentence and word choices you can make at a word level and other factors that make up what we call technical style. So how do you make things easier to read? Well, it takes practice. It can be tempting to say, oh, I'm either a good writer or I'm a bad writer, but that's not true. A lot of writing is formulaic, and it can be repeated over and over again once you learn some of these basic rules. And it can take an entire major's worth of knowledge to really nail down some of these things. So, in this module, we're just going to go over 4 high level tips to get started with making your writing more clear and easy to understand. Before we begin, I'd like to bring up 2 resources outside of this course that you can turn to for further guidance. First, there's the UNT Writing Lab in Sage Hall, but they also have online tutoring, and that's where you can get advice and critiques from writing tutors about the content, the flow, the structure of your writing. You can also go to the comm lab in the auditorium building. They also have virtual appointments, and the comm lab can help you with technical questions like formatting documents and using Microsoft Word and other software. But those tutors don't critique the actual content of your writing. So whatever of those 2 resources you go to will depend on what kind of questions that you have. With that out of the way, let's start with tip number 1. Use active voice, not passive voice. Something I want to make clear here is that active and passive voice don't have anything to do with the content of the sentence or what the sentence is about. Whether the people you're talking about are behaving actively or passively doesn't have any influence on whether the sentence itself is active or passive voice. A sentence about someone walking around could be written in active or passive voice. A sentence about someone kicking a ball or sitting on a couch could also be written in active or passive voice. Here's the simplest way to phrase it. In active voice, you say, who did what? But in passive voice, you say, what was done by someone. In technical style, you want the active voice, that who did what structure. It's preferred because it makes the sentence shorter and simpler. That who did what structure tends to be how people think in their own internal monologues and also how we communicate with one another. This really comes down to where the subjects, verbs, and objects are placed within the sentence. And if you need a refresher on those terms, again, I highly suggest going to the UNT Writing Center. Here we have some tips for using that active voice or that who did what structure. You have to start the sentence with the who. An easy way to do this is by starting with either a person's name, or if you don't know their name, you can use a title or a way to describe them, such as the professor or the girl, things like that. You can also use a pronoun that refers to a person. She did this, or a collective noun. The dogs did that. The company did this. So you put who or whatever is doing the action at the beginning of the sentence. We also have something called the imperative, which is a form we use when we give people instructions. And in the imperative, the who in the sentence is still there and it's implied. So if I say, please send me the file, there's an implied you, please send me the file. And so it's still active voice. We're still putting the who before the what, because if I said that to you, you would know that the who is you when I say, please send me the file. So putting the who at the beginning of the sentence and using active voice creates a simpler, easier to understand sentence. Let's look at a couple practice examples. We're not going to go through all of them. It's really more of a check-in. So if looking at these is giving you a little bit of trouble, again, I highly recommend going to that writing center for more help with this. Let's look at the first one. The proper procedures for presenting a guest check must be learned by the front desk staff. We have what was done by someone structure. So this is in passive voice, which is the voice that we want to avoid. The who in the sentence is the front desk staff. We can change this to active voice by moving that who to the beginning and saying the front desk staff must learn the procedures. Now this is active voice because we're saying who did what, and this mirrors our internal monologues and how we communicate with each other in regular conversation. Let's try another one. There was a discussion of the zoning ordinances by City Council. We have the what was done by someone format, so we know that this is passive voice. The who in this case is City Council, and if we move that to the beginning, we get City Council discussed the zoning ordinances, and now we have active voice. So again, all we're really doing here is figuring out the who and then moving that to the beginning of the sentence. Tip number 2, eliminate noun stacks. These are also called noun strings. In a sentence, a noun is a person, place, or thing. Noun stacks are 3 or more nouns all right next to each other within a sentence. What this does grammatically is it turns all the nouns but that last one actually into adjectives or describing words. And this can cause confusion because people will assume that they have found the noun in the sentence, but actually they have to keep going and it's just another adjective that they've read. This adds to the cognitive load. So when you find a noun stack in your writing, how do you unstack it? Separate the noun stack into smaller phrases and then move them to different parts of the sentence. And grammatically, the way you would do this is by taking 1 or 2 of these nouns and then turning them either into an adjective, a describing word, or a verb, which is an action word. Let's take a look at a couple examples. The consultant suggested that the manager set aside time for a fitness center member evaluation. The first step is to identify the noun stack. In this case, it's fitness center member evaluation. And when I look at this, I'm thinking, how do I separate these nouns? Or how do I convert some of them to verbs or adjectives? There's lots of ways that you could do that and rewrite this sentence. Here's one example. The consultant suggested that the manager set aside time for members to evaluate the fitness center. By turning members into an actor and turning evaluation into evaluate, a verb, we've unstacked these nouns, and now we just have the two, fitness center, and that's much easier to read. When you get the stack down to just two, that's under that threshold of three. It's no longer a noun stack. Let's do the last one. The report list states that the investigation modifications occurred after the study enrollment period. Again, step one is identifying the noun stack. In this sentence, it's study enrollment period. So step two is unstacking that noun stack. Now, there's, again, lots of ways that you could rewrite this. You could probably find 5 or 6 different ways to solve this problem. But one way is the report list states that the investigation modifications occurred after people could no longer enroll in the study. This still means the same thing as the previous version, but the noun stack is separated and it takes less work to read, even if it's actually a couple of words longer. And that's something I want to mention here is that a longer sentence that's easier to read is preferred than a shorter sentence that is harder to read. And now tip 3, avoid fancy language by using simple words. All the tips so far in this presentation have been about making your writing simpler and easier to understand, and this is a continuation of that. You may be under the impression that in college writing, you're supposed to make things sound academic or fancy or elevated by making things difficult to understand. That's not true, especially in technical style. Ultimately, both in your classes and now in your career, the goal for your writing is to be easy to understand. Your professors, your coworkers, your boss, when they're looking at your writing, they want to get to the point. They want to know, what are you saying? What do they need to do? What should they take away from this? And using fancy or overinflated language doesn't help with that. It just adds to cognitive load. Now, this may be different in creative writing like a poetry class, and again, use context for when you're making word choice decisions, but for technical style, simpler words are preferred. Here's a couple examples. The new tuition plan will commence for the fall semester of next year. What if we said instead, next fall tuition plans are changing? It means the same things, but the simpler words are easier to understand. Another example, we will ascertain the opinions of students through a survey. This could be shortened and simplified to just say, we will survey the students, or we will ask the students for their opinions, or we will ask the students what they think. A common mistake I see on students' memos is I see them trying to shoehorn fancy words in to make themselves. A common mistake I see on memos is students trying to elevate writing by artificially inflating these words and trying to shoehorn in fancy alternatives. And the goal here in Tech Comm is not to sound smart, it's to be clear. And simpler words are more clear and better serve that goal. The last tip, tip number 4, is to use specific language. Consider the message you're trying to convey and then be intentional about the amount of information that you include. Make sure that your audience has all the context and details that they need to understand your message, and say things outright rather than just implying them. This will help you avoid writing anything overly vague or ambiguous. So, for example, a microscope in the lab isn't working properly isn't really helpful because it doesn't say what's wrong with it or how you know it's not acting properly. Instead, if you say that the microscope has a scratched lens, that gives whoever you're talking to a much clearer idea of the situation. They know what the exact problem is, which will help them find the best way to fix it. Another example, please turn in your project ASAP. ASAP means different things to different people, so it makes this instruction unnecessarily ambiguous. From this sentence, the students don't actually know how soon they need to submit their projects. The best thing to do is actually pick a date that's meaningful and say that instead. Another one. After the town hall meeting, the citizens were revolting. Here, the word choice is ambiguous because there is a word in that sentence that could mean two things. Revolting could mean protesting, but it could also mean disgusting, and there isn't enough context here for the reader to tell which one you mean. And even if there is, you don't want them to have to think about it anyway. You want to avoid creating situations where there are multiple conflicting interpretations of your writing, so choosing words with only one meaning is a good way to do that. And overall, it takes time and practice to make your writing clearer and more precise. But if you put in the practice, not only will your writing improve, but it'll get easier as well. And so that was 4 high-level tips on things to look for to help make your writing more clear and more concise and easier to understand. After this video, go look at the supplemental materials in this module. They'll help you get a more solid understanding of these concepts. And if any of these concepts still aren't making a lot of sense, I recommend bringing your questions to the UNT Writing Lab. We'll discuss technical communicators as a job later in the course as well. Best of luck until the next module. Thank you. Please contact me or come to office hours with any questions.